Hey guys, today I'll be updating my prediction for the 2024 presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Again, the same nominees that we had in 2020, still at this point in June of 2022. They're still their respective parties' frontrunners. Joe Biden, 38% chance of winning the renomination for the Democratic Party, while on the Republican side, Donald Trump is still the frontrunner with also a 38% chance of winning his party's nomination for a third time in a row. And the reason why I am making this prediction again is because we are now just 5 months away from the 2022 midterms, and right after those midterms, we will start to see a lot of announcements for the 2024 campaign, especially on the Republican side if Donald Trump does not run. If Trump does run, he will still have to go through an entire primary that he is expected to win. However, he will still face some opposition because he is no longer the incumbent president. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden is going to essentially automatically win the renomination of his party if he decides to run for a second term. There is still a very good chance that Joe Biden files to run for re-election. Most presidents do run for re-election. Ronald Reagan, when he ran for re-election, he was already the oldest president in American history, and so even though Joe Biden is the oldest president in American history and also one of the most unpopular presidents in American history, he still does stand a very good chance at winning his re-election. He is still the incumbent president, and he has all of the advantages that comes with that. So right now, Joe Biden has an approval rating of 40.8% and a disapproval rating of 53.9%. This is basically one of the worst parts of his presidency so far in terms of his approval. This is honestly a horrible approval rating. It is actually worse than Donald Trump's approval at this point in time. At this point in time, Trump had an approval rating of a little bit under 43%. So Joe Biden's numbers are definitely nothing for him to be happy about, and the Democratic Party is going to struggle in these midterms because of the numbers that we're seeing for Joe Biden. It really was until after his botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that really made Joe Biden an unpopular president as his approval went into the negatives. Now, for Donald Trump, his favorability rating really has not changed too much since he left office. Basically, since January of 2021 or February of 2021, his favorability rating has been at around -11 to -12%. So really nothing too much to talk about here. Donald Trump is still widely unpopular. However, his numbers technically right now are a bit better than Joe Biden's, but if they were both to go into a head-to-head election, I'm sure this would change. I'm sure that Trump would become more unpopular as Joe Biden's approval would go up as people want to boost, the president that they are supporting. So looking at the polls for the 2024 general election, if you look at the polls for the Democratic Party, you will see that Joe Biden is clearly the front runner in this race. If you look at the polls with Biden, you see that he has led in every single poll that has been released, and he will, of course, win his party's renomination without a doubt if he does go for it. Although if he doesn't, he will have to announce sometime soon after the midterms. He will probably have to announce in early spring at the latest of 2023, because, of course, if he does not run, the Democratic Party still needs to have a whole primary election with debates that typically start in June of next year. So we're actually very close to the 2024 election cycle beginning. Now, as for polls with Donald Trump, he does even better among his own party than Joe Biden, winning a majority of support in most of the polls that have been released. And finally, looking at hypothetical polling between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, currently, according to Electoral Politics, Trump has a lead of 1.2%. I don't think this is actually that bad for Joe Biden, even though Biden was leading by significantly higher margins going into 2020. You do have to consider the fact that Joe Biden is the incumbent president in office, and typically at this point, when the election really is not set between two candidates, the incumbent will typically do a little bit worse once Donald Trump gets back into politics a little bit more and declares his intent to run. I fully expect Joe Biden's numbers to increase if that were to ever occur. So looking at the 2024 map here, I'm going to start off by filling in the solid states for both Biden and Trump. Starting off with the West Coast states for Joe Biden, of course, those are going to be solid. I am going to leave out both New Jersey and Oregon as solid Democratic states. The margins there, I just think, are just going to be a tiny bit lower than the 15% threshold for it to be solid. For Donald Trump, I have basically most most of the states in the middle of the country, as well as almost all of the southern states. They're obviously going to vote for Donald Trump by significant margins. However, I do think that his margins are going to be somewhere between the numbers that we saw for him in 2016 and 2020. So this will give Joe Biden 156 electoral votes and Donald Trump 102 electoral votes, going with just their solid states. Now, before I go any further, make sure to join my Discord server if you have not, the link to which is at the very top of the description below, where you can stay updated on the 2022 and 2024 elections. So looking at this map here, I think that Joe Biden obviously starts off with a little bit of advantage in terms of the states that he will definitely win. But now looking at the likely states, there are states that will see margins of between 5 and 15%. Starting off with Joe Biden's states, I'm going to give him the states of Oregon, Colorado, and New Mexico. Those are the states in the western half of the country here. Oregon and New Jersey, I think that those two states are obviously going to be solid. I did forget DC for Joe Biden. That's going to be an additional 3 electoral votes. But for the states of Oregon and New Jersey, both of these states are going to be likely for Joe Biden. In 2020, he won Oregon by 16% and New Jersey by 15.9%. In 2024, I don't expect him to do any better than this. I think that just given his unpopularity, he still has a good chance of winning. He did win 36 more electoral votes than he needed to last time. So I do think that without Oregon and New Jersey as solid states, he can definitely still win the election, but the margins there are just going to be a little bit smaller. Colorado and New Mexico were 13.5% margins in Colorado and a 10% margin basically in New Mexico. I think it's going to stay somewhere around that, a little bit lower, but not dropping under 5%. I will also be giving Biden the state of Virginia. This, of course, is a state that he won by 10% in 2020, doubling Clinton's 2016 margin here. Even though Glenn Youngkin defeated Terry McAuliffe in the governor's race last year, that is absolutely no sign that Donald Trump is going to defeat Joe Biden here. I think that the race may get a little bit closer, but Joe Biden is still in a very good position to win Virginia. These gubernatorial elections are different. People are much more willing to support the candidate of the opposite party in gubernatorial elections than in presidential elections and Senate elections. So I have 3 final likely states left for Joe Biden. First off, it's the state of Maine. It's at large vote. I think Joe Biden's going to win by a little bit less than 15%. He won it by 9% in 2020. And finally, I have the states of Minnesota and New Hampshire. Both of these states were very close in 2016. Hillary Clinton only won New Mexico by 1.5, Minnesota by 1.5% in 2016, and she narrowly captured New Hampshire by a margin of 0.37%. This was a horrible margin for the former Secretary of State. So Hillary Clinton really did very poorly in both of these traditionally Democratic states, at least for the last couple of decades. But in 2020, Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7.1% and New Hampshire by 7.4%. So I do think that both of these margins are going to remain slightly above that 5% threshold. And so this gives Joe Biden 225 electoral votes. He is now just 45 electoral votes away from the presidency. As for Donald Trump, I have a lot more electoral votes from his likely states. I'm going to start off with the states of Alaska, Indiana, and South Carolina. I think these are the 3 most obvious ones. All 3 of these states voted for Donald Trump by pretty large margins in both 2016 and 2020. Indiana was actually solid in both of those elections, but I think that with Mike Pence off of the ticket, I do think that Trump's margin will decrease just a little bit. He barely won Indiana with a solid margin in 2020. And on top of this, I have both the states of Iowa and Ohio. Donald Trump did particularly well in both of these states. If you go back just 10 years to 2002, Mitt Romney lost Ohio by 3 points and Iowa by 5.8%. Donald Trump in 2016 picked up Ohio by 8.1% and Iowa by 9.4%. If you go from 2012 plus 5.8, plus 6 basically for Obama, to 2016 plus 9.4 for Trump, you'll see that this was basically a shift of 15 points to the right for Donald Trump in 2016 in Iowa, a big shift in Ohio as well, 11%. In 2020, many people expected Joe Biden to do a lot better in both of these states, but he ended up losing them by basically the same margin. The margin went down by a couple a couple tenths of a percent in Ohio and basically 1% in Iowa. So Joe Biden did not do any better in these states in 2020, and he is not going to do any better in these states in 2024. So I have Iowa and Ohio. It's combined 23 electoral votes going for Donald Trump. And finally, I have the state of Texas, and it's 40 electoral votes. I do think that Trump is going to be able to hold on to this state. 40 electoral votes. This is going to be a major state on Trump's list of states that he must win. In 2020, he did win it by a relatively small margin of 5.6%. For a Republican, this is quite a disappointing one. Again, if you go back a decade, this time, this was a state that Mitt Romney won by 16 percentage points. Even John McCain won it by 11.8% in 2008. Donald Trump in 2016 only won Texas by 9%. And Trump's margin is only half of what John Cornyn had against MJ Heger in the Senate race here in 2020. So Donald Trump really did just fundamentally do very poorly in the state of Texas, especially for a Republican, and I think that his margin is not going to be any sort of spectacular margin in 2024 against Biden, but I don't think that it will go under 5%. So with the likely states filled in, this will give Trump 189 electoral votes. I will include the 2nd District of Maine. Nothing too surprising there. He won it by a likely margin both in 2016 and 2020. So with the likely and solid states filled in, we have 225 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 45 electoral votes away from the presidency, and Donald Trump with 189 electoral votes, 81 electoral votes from the presidency. And these 124 electoral votes from these toss-up states are going to be the ones that decide this election. So I'm going to start off with some of the more obvious ones. North Carolina and Florida. Both of these states are going to vote for Donald Trump with lean margins. These are margins of between 1 and 5%. So just looking at both of these states, I mean, North Carolina in 2020 was 1.3% for Joe Biden. I don't think he's going to do any better. I think that if Joe Biden wins his re-election, he's not going to win it by a larger margin than he did in 2020. It is just very difficult for him at this point. I think that with nothing going very well in the country at this point in terms of his administration's management of the country, I do think that he is going to struggle to turn out more voters than he did in the last election. In the state of Florida, 30 electoral votes. Trump had a pretty significant margin of 3.4% here in the last election. I think that in the next one, if this hypothetical scenario were to happen, I do think that Trump would be able to win it by basically the same margin or a little bit higher. I doubt it will go up over 5%. The last time any candidate won Florida by over 5% was George W. Bush in 2004, winning it by 5% over John Kerry. Go back to 2000, it was a tiny margin of just a few hundred votes in 2000. In 1996, 5.7 for Bill Clinton, despite losing it in 1992 to George H.W. Bush. So the state of Florida has basically been one of the closest and most important states because of its high electoral vote count over the last couple of decades. But since Trump came to office in 2016, this state has become less and less competitive. You have 2 Republican senators here. You have a majority of representatives being Republicans. You also have a Republican governor who will most likely be easily reelected this November, as well as with Marco Rubio for the Senate. So the state of Florida really is not the swing state that it used to be. So this will give Trump an extra 46 electoral votes. And now for the likely states for Joe Biden, I'm going to start off with the state of Michigan. He won the state by 2.8% in 2020. I think that he can hold on to it by a margin a little bit over 1%. So this will be 15 electoral votes for the incumbent, as well as the state of Nevada and its 6 electoral votes. I think that despite the fact that Republicans are going to do well here no matter what this November, I do think Democrats still have the edge, at least on the presidential level in Nevada at 6 electoral votes. I will continue to give to Joe Biden. Just looking back, they have won the state of Nevada in every single election since 2008. In 2004, of course, it was won by George W. Bush. The state has voted for Republicans in the past. 2000 was also a Bush victory by 3.5%. Clinton was able to carry it both times. However, of course, before this, it voted staunchly Republican in the Reagan and Bush senior years. So I think that the state of Nevada is one that is going to continue to be very competitive, but Democrats, at least at this point in time, continue to have a little bit of an edge in terms of winning the state. So this gives Joe Biden 246, Donald Trump 235, and these final 4 states are going to decide who wins the 2024 presidential election. Joe Biden really only has to win 2 states, while Donald Trump is going to be forced to pick up at least 3 states if he wants to win, or at least 2, but they have to be both Pennsylvania and Georgia. 3 if he wants to win any, or 3 if it is not going to include Georgia, so, or not include Pennsylvania. So looking at this map here, I just want to get one state off this list here, and that is the 2nd District of Nebraska. So not really a state, but the 2nd District of Nebraska I am going to give to Joe Biden with a tilt margin. In 2020, he won it by 6.6%. This district is going to be harder for him to win, as the gerrymandering has made it a little bit more difficult for Democrats to win here, but I do think that Joe Biden is going to hold onto the district nonetheless. And now we have the final 4 states here. I'm going to give, first off, Donald Trump the state of Georgia. I don't think this is surprising. Biden won Georgia by a margin of 0.23. And I mean, just looking at this graph here, I find it very difficult to believe that he can win it again against Trump in 2024. If you look at the 2016 margin, it was a margin of 5.1% in favor of Trump over Clinton. So at this point, Joe Biden kind of has the popularity level of Hillary Clinton, and I think that as time goes on, he's becoming more and more like Hillary Clinton in terms of not being liked as a leader. So Georgia, 16 electoral votes for Donald Trump. I'm also going to give him the state of Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes. I don't think this is too surprising either. Biden only won the state by 0.63%, smaller than Trump's 0.76% margin in 2016. So I think that Biden is going to struggle immensely in Wisconsin. He barely flipped the state, and even though this state had voted for the Democrats in every single election up until 2016 since 1984, the state of Wisconsin is still one that is trending more and more to the right, as it is the entirety of the Rust Belt. That's why you saw Donald Trump do so well here in two elections ago. But in 2020, Wisconsin was a pretty surprisingly low victory, considering that Biden actually pulled the best here out of all 3 of these upper Rust Belt states. And I'm also going to give Joe Biden now the state of Pennsylvania to finish off the Rust Belt, 19 electoral votes. I do think that Biden can hold on to Pennsylvania. Again, in 2020, of course, you saw that Biden needed to win these 3 Rust Belt states. Those were the 3 that Clinton lost, that lost her the election. So Joe Biden now will have to win the state of Arizona. I do think that Wisconsin is going to vote to the right of Arizona in the next election. So for the state of Pennsylvania, it's 19 electoral votes. Biden won it by 1.2 last time. I think that Biden can very, very narrowly hold on to it. And finally, in the state of Arizona, I am going to give it to Donald Trump. It's 11 electoral votes. I think will flip back for the Republican Party, although I do think that in the long term, Democrats will do better and better here. In 2020, of course, Biden won by 0.3. We saw a margin of 3.5 in the previous election. So in 2020, this was, of course, again, a very small margin for Joe Biden. And I mean, really, he's probably not going to do any better here in 2024. That is just highly implausible. So 11 electoral votes for Arizona, and this will give Trump the presidency. So 272 electoral votes for former President Donald Trump, giving him the victory over the incumbent Joe Biden at 266. Now, obviously, the election is still very far away, so what I'm really trying to say with these numbers is that the election is going to be very close. I don't think that right now that Donald Trump is necessarily just going to win by a very, very small margin, but I do think that with how things stand right now, even though Biden's numbers aren't looking good now, they will improve if he does run for re-election. That I can promise you. That's what we saw with Barack Obama's numbers. He really did not trend up until the very end. So Joe Biden, 266, I think that right now he is at a little bit of a disadvantage going into his re-election, but of course things can change very quickly. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below whether or not you think Biden can win his re-election over Donald Trump in the next election. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next video.